Welcome to the Crush Your Sugar Cravings Summit. I'm Michelle Jolly with Healthy Horizons Coaching. Today, we'll be interviewing Katherine Kimber. Katherine is a non-diet registered dietitian, certified intuitive eating counselor, and founder of Nude Nutrition. She helps those who want to get off the diet train for good, but who are stuck in the cycle of swinging between diet land, being good, and donut land, falling off the wagon. She supports those who are struggling with food guilt, food anxieties, emotional eating, binge eating, yo-yo dieting, and feeling a little trapped or confused about what and how to eat. She has an NHS background and is trained to support with medical conditions like disordered eating, eating disorders, polycystic ovarian syndrome, irritable bowel syndrome, diabetes, and high cholesterol. Katherine has completed an extensive amount of formal education and training with a first-class degree in nutrition and dietetics from King's College London, and a dissertation in her master's in clinical research. She's also highly experienced in providing motivational support and holds a diploma in neurolinguistic programming. Katherine is passionate about helping you reach your happiest and healthiest self without dieting and deprivation. Thanks for being with us today, Katherine. So good to have you.
Thank you. What a long introduction.
You have done a lot of stuff.
I have, yeah. Yeah, that's me, kind of, my professional side.
Yeah. So that kind of gives your professional background. Why don't you tell us a little bit about kind of your story and how you got to where you are today in health and wellness, and why it's important to share it with everyone.
Yeah, and this took me a little bit of time to kind of figure out and share. But for me, I have my own background of having quite a negative relationship with food, and that's what accelerated me to get to where I am now and doing what I do. But it started for me when I was a child, and I was quite a chubby kid, especially as a young teenager. And I felt like carrying that extra weight was something that wasn't acceptable, which in my teenage years led me on to having a constant battle with food, which I now know was a result of or related to restricting my food in order to try and control my weight. And at the time, I didn't really know that I was dieting, and this consumed so much of my thoughts that it became my life, my career, and that led me on to become a dietitian. And like you said, I worked in the NHS for a few years. I then went back to uni and did my master's in clinical research. And then I had the opportunity to work in a high-end weight loss clinic in West London to help people lose weight. And of course, I got involved in the program myself, and that triggered all of the problems that I'd had with food over the last 10 years or so. And some of the key things were being in that constant cycle that you mentioned of swinging between diet land and then falling off the wagon and ended up in donut land, and just feeling really out of control. I was either on something or off something. And I was experiencing a lot of shame around this because I was a qualified dietitian that was supposed to know what I was doing with this. And I still wasn't able to get my own act together around food. So for me, it wasn't about learning more knowledge. It was about looking at things from a different angle. But I also lived in this intense fear of, if I keep, I know I can't keep restricting, but if I let go of these restrictions, then what's going to happen? Because I'm just totally out of control. And it wasn't until, it was affecting lots of areas of my life, from my relationships to socializing, and just a lot of stress that I was carrying around and constant food thoughts. And it wasn't until about 6 months into the weight loss clinic that I attended a seminar at the Royal Society of Medicine in central London, and there was a presenter there speaking about disordered eating, and I saw myself in nearly every single one of the points. And I knew it was something that existed, but I think it just kind of solidified to me, actually, this has been going on for like 10 years. And you've dabbled in and out, and you've never really, it's still there, it's still going on. And so that was a trigger point for me to say, right, you need to get some help. And so I looked for support in different camps of counselling, and nobody really had the solution for me. And I later learned that the issues I was experiencing affected around 75% of women in the Western world, and led me down the path of finding the non-diet approach that I work with now, specifically intuitive eating. And really it taught me that there was nothing wrong with me. What is wrong is this culture that we live in that is constantly telling us that we can't be healthy, happy, successful until we fit into a certain body shape or size. And for many of us, we're led to assume that this pursuit of weight loss is safe, it's harmless, you know, everyone's doing it. But what I came to learn through my personal experience and the research and with working with people is that it can lead to all sorts of complex issues with food. And so the reason, well, I've now kind of made it my purpose to help other people find this food peace and food freedom, away from food obsessions. And that's why I wanted to come and talk on this summit, because I think there's going to be a lot of people that are probably struggling with the same sorts of things. Yeah.
That's a great, really unique perspective that I think a lot of people need to hear, that we don't have to be on the diet cycle, and there are other ways to work around this and still be healthy and happy. In the title of the summit, we talk about crushing your sugar cravings. How does sugar cravings kind of work into your intuitive eating work? Do you talk about them, or how does that? Tell us more about that.
Yeah, a lot of people come to me with, sorry, there's some weird noises going on outside. A lot of people come to me with this sense of feeling addicted to sugar, which I absolutely believe is present. Like, I once thought that. I remember going to see one of the therapists who told me that I was addicted and that I needed to cut it out, and it's addictive as cocaine, and you need to go teetotal, which I tried. So I absolutely know how that feels, and believe that people feel that compulsion, that addiction, and the stress around it. But I thought it might be helpful to maybe just discuss what we know in terms of the research for the sugar addiction theory, what an alternative way, like what we know against it, and then maybe share a little bit more about intuitive eating and a different approach to looking at things. Would that be?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay?
Yeah.
I just think it would make more sense perhaps in that way before I start talking about intuitive eating.
Sure.
But in terms of sugar addiction, many of us have a sweet tooth, and in fact we are born with this innate preference for sweet and sugary and salty foods. And this preference for sweet things makes some of us feel that we might have an addiction to it. And it's a long-standing controversial subject that's been around for some time, and it's based on the idea that sugar, this addiction, it can be as addictive as drugs. And we will see this in the mainstream media. When you Google sugar addiction, a lot of stuff is going to come up, and it's quite often, sometimes qualified, but often unqualified health gurus that are sharing that narrative around sugar being as addictive as cocaine. And as I said, that's what I was told. And I think this is reinforced by conversations that can happen left, right, and centre around us about how sweet foods can have a hold over us, and the frustration with people feeling out of control. Like, I hear it in my everyday life quite often with friends and social events. It's like, oh, you know, that's really addictive. So it's reinforced by all of those messages, I think, that we consume around us. But in order to understand addiction, I think we need to understand actually what addiction really means. And addiction is really complex, and when the term is used in terms of drug addiction, it's used to describe chemical chemicals acting on the brain and mechanisms going on inside of us, resulting in dependency, a loss of control, repeated overuse despite the negative consequences of that. And for sugar to be addictive, it needs to have this kind of rewarding effect that we see with drugs. And actually we do see that. So in both human and animal studies, when humans consume and animals consume sugar, it does light up certain reward centers in the brain, and it stimulates the release of neurotransmitters like dopamine, so the feel-good pleasure chemicals. And so does nicotine, cocaine, and other drugs that are addictive as well, do the same sort of properties. But we also see the same light centers lighting up when we eat foods and when we have sex, which are both things that are linked to our survival. And so this release of dopamine, this reward, is seen as a good behavior, and it encourages us to do more of that behavior. So in the sugar addiction theory, it's thought that if you eat sugar, you get the dopamine receptors that tell you it's a good, you know, that the hit of dopamine that says it's a good behavior. What can happen is those dopamine receptors, I don't know how much of this has been talked about already on the summit, down-regulate, and we can develop a tolerance to sugar, and then we need more sugar to get the same hit, and then that can lead to overconsumption. Am I making sense?
Yeah, that's great.
That's the theory. And there was a key study that was used to support this theory that looked at higher body weight individuals and the fact that they had fewer dopamine receptors. So the link there is that, if you're of higher weight, then maybe there's a reason for that, because your dopamine receptors are down-regulated, meaning that you've got this sugar tolerance. And so that does nowhere near give enough of a full picture to say, actually, we have this, we're addictive. But so that proposed addiction cycle is we eat sugar, we crave more sugar, we develop a tolerance, we get lots of pleasure from that, and then if we quit it, we crave more. And that makes so much sense, I think, to a lot of people. Like, I remember experiencing that and reading up about it and being like, yeah, that makes sense to me, it goes with my behaviors, and I get it. But a lot of those studies around that sugar addiction theory come from animal studies, which support that mechanism that I've just described. But the studies that we see in humans are really not as clear, and they never consistently find that association between weight and the dopamine receptors. And so we can't really use that as a sound theory. And so whilst it's a popular theory, its evidence to support it is pretty weak, and there's a lot of things that are unanswered. And I think it's unsurprising that the fact that, of course, sugar lights up reward centers in the brain, it might think that we're onto something there, but actually there's a reason for that. Our bodies are designed to eat food to keep us alive. So of course there's a reward system to get more glucose, because that's what our bodies need to survive. And really interestingly, the symptoms of sugar addiction mimic those that we see in eating disorders like binge eating, and it can often explain people's responses and feelings of addiction to these foods. And from what I've learned, I think this concept of food addiction is there's a theory behind it, there's many people that talk about it, but what I think is, if we're stuck in that mindset of I'm addicted, I therefore need to cut out sugar for the rest of my life, it can actually prevent people from looking at other ways of pursuing a more positive relationship with food and moving away from it, because there can be a number of other reasons why food can be seen as addictive and irresistible, and we can feel compulsion around certain foods. And so the work that I do is to kind of break that down with individuals through the framework of intuitive eating. In terms of some of the flaws of in the research that we do see that supports that theory around food not being chemically addictive, is that some of the key studies, and one study in particular that was really influential, that was done on rats, which ignited a lot of interest in sugar addiction, in the sugar addiction theory. They had fasted the rats for 12 hours and then gave them either sugar or rat food for 12 hours. And of course, the rats binge ate on sugar. And the design of this study, and I think there's been other ones that are similar, rarely get spoken about. But what we're really seeing here is a reaction to the food restriction, not necessarily food addiction. And a lot of the studies that I've done in humans have a lot of flaws in that they never account for, or they never control for food restriction or dieting, which we know is a huge predictor of feeling out of control around food, which could explain that sort of addictive sense around the food. But when you look at studies on compulsive eaters who are encouraged to eat forbidden foods as part of their treatment, interestingly, they eat less of those forbidden foods. And if it was an addictive substance, then it would have the opposite effect of doing that. So there's lots of arguments as to how, there's some arguments for, there's lots of arguments against, and I think the arguments for staying in that sugar addiction type mentality can prevent people from actually taking action to live more of a fulfilling, flexible life. So yeah,
that makes sense. Yeah, it's kind of, your body naturally craves the sweet, so yeah, that's not a bad thing. So yeah, we should let our bodies have a little or some sweets, and then the restriction is what. You said a lot better, but it makes sense.
So you asked me about the approach that I sort of use.
Is there any like sugar cravings within that? Do you just how do people, do you talk about sugar cravings, or kind of just it's not a thing really, or you don't?
No, we definitely talk about that, because a lot of people come to me, feel that they're addicted to sugar, and I have a lot of fear and stress around eating certain foods. So there are a number of ways in which people, can support people in breaking out of a negative relationship with food. But I personally like to use, there's a framework called intuitive eating that was developed by two dietitians about 25 years ago. And at the time it was research inspired, but now it has over 125 studies to support its benefits. And we know that intuitive eaters tend to have more variety with their eating, they have more body appreciation, they're not preoccupied with food or dieting, they don't label foods as good and bad, or they place importance of taste and satisfaction on the food highly, and they usually use hunger and satiety and satisfaction to determine when to eat and how much to eat. So really connected with their bodies. And the way in which I like to describe intuitive eating is, if anyone knows that's listening, any young children, or if you can think back to when you're a young child, we are usually, when we're young children, really good at knowing when we're hungry, knowing when we've had enough food. We'll naturally turn our head away when we're not interested in food anymore, and we'll naturally seek out a variety of different foods. So some days we'll eat the tomatoes and the chocolate, and other days we'll eat none of that, and we'll eat different foods. And we tend to be quite intuitive. But as we grow older, we're given messages around food, such as you need to finish all of your vegetables before you can have your pudding, which undermines our own ability to self-regulate our body and what we need. But it also places a moral value on foods, teaching us that certain foods are good, therefore you're good for eating them, and other foods are bad, therefore you're bad for eating them. And then you throw in the mix, especially for a lot of women, but all of the as we grow older, all of the standards that are put on us and all of the unrealistic expectations that are put on us around our body size and what we should look like. Many people then develop eating, ways of eating and follow meal plans and follow ways of eating to try and fix themselves into the size that society has deemed that they should be, which creates a complete disruption between what the body needs versus what the mind is, what you're trying to tell yourself you should need. And that's what creates this complex relationship with food for a lot of people. And when I talk about a complex relationship with food, I see people that, I think you mentioned this in my bio, but sense of like feeling completely obsessed with food, having lots of food and body image thoughts all of the time, maybe agonizing over menus before you go out for dinner, eating in secret, feeling really out of control, a lot of shame and guilt and anxiety attached to food, increased emotional eating. So these are the sorts of things that I'm referring to. But intuitive eating is a framework to help people get back to that place of being more intuitive. And it's not something that people go on, but it's a kind of guidance set of principles to help give people a bit of a roadmap. And within that framework, there are a number of different things that we will work on that will improve people's eating.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and that kind of brings up thinking, like as a child, we're more intuitive and we're able to just do what we feel like our body wants. But then as we get older, you kind of also bring in stresses of work or relationships or that kind of, do you help people with that also in your work, or is it more focusing on,
Yeah, definitely. And the concept of tuning in, it is actually there is a technical term for that called interoceptive awareness. And interoceptive awareness is the ability to perceive physical sensations that arise in the body and be able to act on them. And in relation to what you just said, so those signals might be hunger and fullness, emotions, and there are a number of things that can get in the way of actually tuning in. So busyness, stress, illness. And so yes, some of the foundations of what I would do with clients is looking at the kind of basic self-care. You can't honor your natural hunger signals if you've not got food at home to honor them with. You've not bought food, you've not got access to food, or you've not made time in your day to eat. So definitely looking at all aspects of an individual's life and how that influences their food and their choices. But in answer to your question about how I would support someone that feels addicted to sugar, there's so many avenues I can go down here. Where do you start? So one of the foundational principles of intuitive eating is rejecting the diet mentality, and that's understanding about body weight regulation and learning to understand and trust that your body will figure out where its weight needs to be. And so a lot of the work is about unlearning some of the things that we've been told as we've grown up about our bodies and relearning. So we'll do a lot of work around that. And a lot of people will say to me, and a lot of people that come to work with me want to lose weight. That's the kind of reason why they might have engaged in restrictive behaviours in the first place. But when we look at their history of doing so, quite often, actually it's never resulted in permanent or sustained weight loss for more than 6 months, for more than a 2, 3, 4, 5 year period. And actually dieting is one of the biggest predictors of weight gain. So we look at their history and reflect on that and look at how their attempts of weight loss have gone in the service of weight loss. And quite often they're like, I've only actually gained weight since I started dieting, or I'm now living this life that's very, very restrictive and I don't like it. So I need to change something. So a lot of the work is around body acceptance and understanding what's going on in the body. But one of the drivers that can make a lot of people feel out of control around food is this primal drive to want to eat because of hunger. And quite often my clients will know what it feels like to be a 0 on the scale. So if you think about hunger and fullness like a petrol tank, they'll know what it feels like to be at rock bottom and 0 and ravenous, or maybe Christmas dinner stuffed. But what we want to find is those subtleties where it's kind of feels good to start eating. Maybe when you're kind of politely hungry, you could eat, but you could wait half an hour, because that's when you're going to be able to approach food in a moderate and conscious way. If you're approaching it from down at 0 because you've had, nothing for breakfast or a bit of Greek yogurt and fruit and then a salad for lunch, of course you're going to come through the door at 6 o'clock at night and be eating the house down or buying all of those snacks on the way home and feeling compulsion around sugar, because that's the body's quickest and most available source of energy to use is sugar. So we look at hunger and then we start looking at permission around food, which I can talk about if you want me to.
Yeah. That's a great way of thinking of it. Yeah. I didn't think about that. Yeah, a lot of people talk about the fasting and this and that, but yeah, then you just kind of
one of the biggest predictors of binge eating.
Yeah.
So it's crazy. And that's what we saw in the fasted rats. It's like, of course they went crazy on the sugar because they were fasted. But in terms of then looking at individuals' problem foods, I can talk more about that if you want. I can talk more about how I might work with someone. So usually when someone comes to me, they'll have, and I'll get them to write this down, like a list of foods that they wish they could eat just in moderation and have around and not worry about, have a bit and move on.
Yeah.
So I'll get them to write down their list of guilty foods. And then we might start by looking at, it depends on the client, some people want to dive straight in, but we might start looking at one of the least problematic foods on that list. And an example of what that might be is something like fruit or like dried fruit or fruit juice. And so an example might be to look at a raisin. And interestingly, when we have a chat about this raisin, for a lot of people, it is buried in so much judgment. There's it's like things like, I don't know, there's a certain amount of raisins that I should have. I should only have them when I'm exercising. If I have one, it's going to set me off. They're really high in sugar. They're bad for you. All this judgment, and I'm like, right, where did that come from? Let's break it down. And what we'll do is expose all of this judgment. Maybe flip it on its head and look at actually, well, what benefits could some dried fruit bring? Fiber and vitamin C and other nutrients. A great convenient snack. And then what we'll do is a mindful eating exercise on the raisin, as an example. It might be chocolate, it might be something else, but raisin is an example. Because when we go in and try these foods with real curiosity, we get to discover, do I even like this food? How does it feel in my body? Obviously we would do this when that individual is not, that they know they're not hungry, so perhaps just 30 minutes or 60 minutes after a meal, because then it's less risky. And we also, like a lot of clients might tell themselves, right, if I eat this raisin, it's going to set me off for the rest of the day, and or if I eat this chocolate bar or whatever it is, that's it, I've blown it, I've broken it, I'm going to just keep eating food all day. And so what we'll do is also, just be really curious, because if you tell yourself that that's it, it's going to set me off, I'm going to eat the whole packet, then it just becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and that's what you do. So we'll break that down, and they're like, oh, okay, yeah, no, it was nice. Or they might be like, oh, actually, it wasn't that exciting. But the theory behind doing that and introducing it without curiosity, without judgment, there's a theory behind that, and it's called habituation. Have you heard of that before?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the kind of the word sort of describes a
Oh.
little bit around what
Yeah.
it's about, but I can explain it. So habituation is something that happens in lots of areas of our life. An example I can use is with this dress that I brought about a year ago. And when I first bought it, I was really excited to wear it. And I wore it at a wedding, I wore it to work, I wore it, you know, to see my friends. I'd dress it up, dress it down. I was really excited by it. And I now have it in my wardrobe, in the back of my wardrobe, with my other dresses. I still really like it and I still wear it, but I'm not as excited about it. And that's because over time I've become habitualized to it. It's kind of just slotted into my normal life. And the same thing happens when we I don't know, if we buy anything new that's exciting. Maybe if we were to drive out of a garage with a brand new car, we want to drive it everywhere, we want to go to the shop even though we don't need anything. And then after about 3 or 4 months, it's got crumbs in the bottom of the car, and you've eaten in the car, and you're like, you know, it's great, you still like your car, but you don't need to drive in it every single day, or go for drives in it. And so we become habitualized. And the same thing happens with food. When we allow it into our life in a way that feels safe, you know, breaking down that judgment, bringing it in. Yes, at first it might feel a bit exciting and a bit crazy, and we might feel a bit out of control around that. But as time goes on, it will normalize. But the problem that I see is that, especially clients that are embarking on an intuitive eating, is they're like, they brought in the crisps, they brought in the cookies, they brought in the ice cream, they brought everything in all at once, and it felt way out of control. And they're like, no, it can't be trusted. I've got to go back into my pen. I can't, you know, I need to restrict myself from those foods. And that's what I think can happen in this sugar addiction theory. People feel out of control and they go back in because they're like, no, I can't be trusted. And so that's why it's really important to do it with one thing at a time. So if I were to buy this dress in green, yellow, pink, orange, you know, 5 different colours, it would take me 5 times as long to become habitualised to this dress, because I bought it in 5 different colours. So if you introduce ice cream and you introduce rum and raisin, chocolate, double chocolate, white chocolate, vanilla, like that is going to be overwhelming and exciting. But if you introduce one small thing at a time, actually you then get to discover, like, actually, yeah, I like this food, I enjoy it, I can eat it, but I've got permission to eat it whenever I want to eat it, so I don't need to eat it all at once or right now. And so that's the kind of theory behind giving yourself permission and reintroducing new foods. But I think a lot of people fear that if they do that, it's just going to be a free-for-all and feel out of control. And that's why when I work with clients, it's very much guiding, moving through this at a pace that feels comfortable and safe. Yeah,
I like that. It kind of seems like a great way to work with children with it, when they're not really, like, instead of depriving them of sugar till they're 6 and then they go to a birthday party and they just go crazy. Just slowly, safely with you, introduce it and say, this is what it is, help them notice, be mindful of the mood changes, and if they feel how they feel when it, like you say, that's great.
And that's, a lot of the studies around this have been done in kids, actually. And if you had a kid in a room with a plate of cookies and you say, right, whenever you have a cookie, another one's going to get put there, versus the kid in a room with a plate of cookies that as soon as they're all gone, they're gone, no more. What do you think is going to happen to the different rooms?
The one that knows it's going to be there. Kind of like people that don't have food, like that, like you were talking about, they don't have access to food. They kind of just eat as much as they can because they don't know it's going to be there again. They don't know when the next time they're going to get food. So
that's exactly it. It's like, well, so the kid that gets the cookies topped up all the time, they're like, okay, well, I'll have as much as I need to feel satisfied, and then I'll stop because they're always going to be there. And the same thing happens if you have kids in a room around a table with a bowl of M&Ms and you tell them to not eat the red ones. They, even though they're the same as the green and the blue and the yellow,
Really?
they eat the red ones. And the same happens at a buffet. If you tell the kids not to eat the fruit, they'll want to eat the fruit. So it doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily just around the high fat, high sugary foods. But in terms of the parents, you mentioned about children, the best thing that parents can do for their children is be a role model around that, and role model how to behave around food, so that the kids don't pick up on those restrictive, on-off diety type behaviors and have their own issues.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful information. Yeah, and we could go on forever, but we're coming to the end, so we can kind of close stuff up. And is there anything that people can kind of maybe take away? Just one thing that they could do to kind of see if they would be better working in this type of a way of working on their weight or just body image? Is there like a test they can do? How then?
So, I mean, if any of this has resonated with any listeners, then I would encourage you to not box yourself into, I'm addicted and that's it, I can't be healed, or I can't be cured, or I can't be fixed. Actually, there's other ways of looking at things and looking into approach like intuitive eating. I've got lots of information on my website. I've got a 7-step to food peace and food freedom audio and workbook that can be accessed via my website. That might be an interesting place to start. And there's also the official intuitive eating book, the edition that's just come out recently, which I would recommend if you're really interested in this sort of work. If you're wanting to kind of pursue a little bit more of it on your own, but having a really open and curious mindset about this topic.
Yeah, that's a great way, for people to approach it. Yeah, and they can always reach out to you too if they want someone to help guide them through it. But to start, like you mentioned, the free gift that you're going to give people is the 7 steps to food, peace, and freedom. So
the download, it's not download. It's an audio. It's a 20-minute audio, and then a workbook that goes with that. And that's accessible on my website, and I'm also on Instagram at Nude Nutrition RD, NUDE Nutrition RD. And if anyone has any questions or anything they want to share, they can reach out to me on there, direct message me, email me. But I do work with individuals on a one-to-one basis through this on video call anywhere in the world, including America. So happy for anyone to reach out, have a chat. I offer free discovery calls as well.
Well, it's wonderful. A new perspective that I'm glad that people are able to hear on the summit, to get some new ideas and actually feel there can be relief and freedom instead of the diet cycle and restrictions. And
I have lots of stories on my website, video stories of clients that have come from a place of feeling completely out of control, addicted. And so that might be quite inspiring. I know a lot of clients that come and work with me are like, oh, I know it's, I've seen other people are able to do it as well. So that might be helpful. But a lot of clients that I've worked with have not been able to have chocolate in the house for 20 years. And then they're like, it's in the back of the cupboard, I've not thought about it for the last month. So that is, I think, really big for a lot of people. And it is possible. It's just finding the right support and approach and having the open mindset as well.
Great. Well, hope everyone will reach out and grab some of the resources and look into this different approach that they might not have heard of. So thanks so much for being with us today again. It was wonderful speaking with you and learning more. And just everybody else, thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the interview, and we have a couple more to come, so please tune in and watch the next video soon. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Bye.